Osseous tissue, that is bone tissue, is one of the hardest tissues in the human body. Although it looks very solid and permanent, it is alive and it changes according to the stresses placed on it. Frequent pulling on it leads to the formation of bumps and protrusions. Frequent pressing or compressive forces causes bone to break down. Too much pressure, yep, leads to breaks and fractures. In this video, I'm giving an introduction to the skeleton and the osseous tissue it is composed of. The objectives of this video are to, number 1, state the locations and functions of the skeletal cartilages. Number 2, name the two divisions of the skeleton and their functions. Number 3, to classify bones into 4 categories according to their structures. And number 4, to describe 5 important functions of bone tissue. When we look at a human skeleton in a Halloween cartoon or on a movie, or when we see a skeleton on a TV program or in a book, we see primarily bones. And it's easy to think that the skeletal system is only made up of all of the bones inside of our body. For this class, you need to know that the skeletal system is not only bone, but there are cartilages and ligaments as well. Bones are organs consisting of osseous tissue, blood vessels, nervous tissue, and fibrous connective tissue. The functions of bone include protection, support, mineral storage, nutrient storage, and blood cell formation. There are 206 bones in a human body. Attached to these bones are the cartilages. Cartilages are connective tissues that protect, lubricate, and connect the ends of bones. Sometimes your cartilages also form body structures. The 3 types of cartilages that we associate with the skeleton are hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and the fibrocartilages. In addition to the cartilages, there's also ligaments. Ligaments are bands of fibrous connective tissue. They connect bones of the skeleton, the cartilages, or they sometimes hold our joints together. So bones, cartilages, and ligaments all together form the skeletal system. Now, in past semesters, I didn't really talk about ligaments very much, but after my own recent knee injury, I learned how important these tissues are. Ligaments are bands of dense, regular connective tissue. Remember talking about this tissue in Chapter 4? It's notable because it has bundles of collagen fibers that are arranged in parallel fashion, like this. So the tissue can resist pulling in one plane or in one direction. So ligaments, these bands of dense regular connective tissue, support organs inside of the human body. For example, there are a number of ligaments that support the uterus and hold it in the proper place in the pelvic cavity. But ligaments can also connect bone to bone, holding bones in the correct orientation in space to stabilize joints. These tissues have a poor blood supply, that is, there are no blood vessels running through them, so that makes recovery from a ligament injury rather slow. It can take months. They do, however, have a vascular sheath, a covering that houses blood vessels, so nutrients can diffuse out of those blood vessels into the tissue. Ligaments are innervated, that is, they have nerve fibers for sensory and proprioception information. Proprioception, by the way, is the body's awareness of where its parts are in space. Tearing and stretching of a ligament is called a sprain, and the degree of damage is classified in terms of grades. Grade 1 is the least severe and grade 3 is the most severe. In a traumatic injury to a ligament, blood vessels that are in that vascular sheath may be torn, leading to swelling and inflammation at the site of injury. The injury may also be extremely painful as the nerve fibers here become damaged. By the way, it can take up to 12 months for those nerve fibers to heal. In the worst injuries, the ligament may be partially or completely pulled away from bones, necessitating surgical repair. The human skeleton develops from a model made up of skeletal cartilage. As humans develop inside and outside of the womb, much of this model becomes ossified, that is, it's converted to bone. The remaining cartilages protect, lubricate, and connect the ends of bones, or form body structures. Your skeletal cartilages are composed primarily of water. This gives it compressibility. They all contain chondrocytes. Remember, chondro means cartilage and cyte means cells, so chondrocytes are cartilage cells, in lacunae, these holes. And those holes are surrounded by extracellular matrix, or ECM. There are no blood vessels or nerves in your skeletal cartilages, but these structures are found inside of the dense connective tissue girdle called the perichondrium that surrounds the cartilages. I mean, peri means around, and chondro, there's that chondro again, means cartilage. Your perichondrium prevents the outward expansion of cartilages when they're compressed. Think about when you jump. There's cartilage that separates the femur and the tibia. When you jump and those bones slam into each other, the cartilage absorbs a lot of that shock energy. If it wasn't for the perichondrium, after a few jumps, that cartilage would just splatter out, and soon you'd be jumping bone to bone. It'd be extremely painful. So the perichondrium has to be really, really strong to resist that compression. The perichondrium also, as I mentioned just a second ago, contains blood vessels and nutrients. So there are three skeletal cartilages. Hyaline is the most abundant one. It provides support, flexibility, and resilience to the skeleton. You'll know it when you see it because the ECM looks kind of glassy and smooth. You won't really see major collagen or elastic fibers running throughout. You'll see interspersed among the ECM numerous lacunae with chondrocytes inside. So here are some lacunae and then the chondrocyte you can see because of the nucleus here. Your hyaline cartilages are located in a number of places. So for your exam, you need to know the function of these cartilages and kind of where you'd find them in the skeleton. The first type of hyaline cartilage that you need to know is called the articular cartilage. Articular. It covers the ends of your bones at your movable joints. So here it's represented by the kind of blue color that you see at the various joints. Notice that the bones in the wrist and in the fingers, because they are movable, also have those articular cartilages. The second type of cartilage is called a costal cartilage. Anytime you see the word costal, you should automatically think ribs. So the costal cartilages connect the ribs here to the sternum. Third type of hyaline cartilage is the nasal cartilage. It helps to support the external bones of your nose and helps to form the nasal canals. Finally, we have the respiratory cartilages. The respiratory cartilages are found really on the inside of your body. They consist of cartilage structures that form your voice box or larynx, and the cartilage rings that help to hold the bronchi and bronchioles open. These are passageways that allow air that comes from your mouth and nose to get down into your lungs. If it wasn't for the respiratory cartilages, these tubes would collapse. They reinforce your passageways, your air passageways. The second type of skeletal cartilage that you need to know is the elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilages, just like you can see here, have very fine elastic fibers running through them. That's what these little purple lines are. Interspersed among that, you'll see the same lacunae, which are characteristic of cartilage, along with chondrocytes. So you can see the nuclei here. Okay. Your elastic cartilages look a lot like hyaline cartilage, except you'll see the elastic fibers running throughout. There are two main places where you'll find the elastic cartilage. You'll find it forming the external portion of your ear. That's why it's kind of flexible if you bend it. And you'll find it at the epiglottis. The epiglottis is a little flap of cartilage that folds down anytime you eat or drink something. It helps prevent food from going through the trachea down to your lungs. So you can think of it as like a little flap that comes down and shuttles food and drink down the esophagus to your stomach. So that's the epiglottis. Lastly, we have the fibrocartilages. Fibrocartilages are highly compressible and withstand stretching. They look a bit like this. You'll know them when you see them because you have the lacunae and the chondrocytes, which are characteristic of cartilages, but running throughout the ECM, you'll see these thick collagen bands. They look a bit different from the elastic fibers in the last slide. We're going to find fibrocartilages in sites that are subject to heavy pressure and stretch. Kind of like the pubic symphysis here. This is a bit of cartilage that connects the pelvic bones anteriorly. And then you have the meniscus, which is in the knee. It's the little plate of cartilage that separates the end of your femur from the end of your tibia. You'll also find these cartilages separating the vertebrae in your spine. They form what's called the intervertebral discs that help fit the bones of the vertebra and accept compressive forces whenever there's stress on the spine. Skeletal cartilages have two main mechanisms of growth. The first is called appositional. In appositional, chondroblasts that are located around the external surface of a cartilage begin to secrete matrix against that external face, and this widens the cartilage from the outside. The second type is called interstitial growth. In interstitial growth, chondrocytes that are within the cartilage begin to divide and secrete matrix. This expands the cartilage from within. As we age, some of our cartilages will undergo a process called calcification. This is the deposition of calcium salts within the cartilage, and it causes the cartilage to harden. Calcified cartilage is hard, but it is not bone tissue. It's still cartilage. Calcification happens as a part of normal bone growth as well as a part of old age. So here's a few questions. Let's see what you remember about the skeletal cartilages. Which of the following is not a type of cartilage? Would that be hyaline, elastic, fibrocartilage, or dense regular? Why don't you pause the video, think of your answer, and then check back to see if you're right. Did you say dense regular? That's right. Dense regular is a type of connective tissue, but it is not a cartilage. Let's try another one. Fibrocartilage would be found at which location? Would that be the elbow, the knee, the larynx, or the external ear? Pause the video and check back for the correct answer. Did you say knee? Did you remember the meniscus? I hope you did. The meniscus is a thick plate of cartilage, fibrocartilage that's in the knee. It accepts the compressive forces from the femur and the tibia. Growth of cartilage from within the cartilage is termed, would that be interstitial growth, remodeling, appositional growth, or endochondral growth? Did you say interstitial? You're right. Good job. There are 206 named bones in the human skeleton, and they're divided into two main groups based upon location. First, you have what's called the axial skeleton. So these bones are going to be those that make up the long axis of the body. They're the skull, the bones of the vertebral column, like the thoracic, cervical, lumbar, and sacral vertebra, and coccyx. And then you have the bones of the rib cage as well. Everything that's in this kind of orange color that you see here, that's part of the axial skeleton. Next, you have the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton consists of all of the bones of your upper and lower limbs. So that's the bones of your fingers, your wrists, your lower arm, upper leg or thigh, lower leg, patella, and the bones of your feet and ankles. Lots of bones. In addition to those bones, you have the bones that form what's called the pectoral girdle here and here. And you have the bones of the pelvic girdle, which are here and here. So that's also part of the appendicular skeleton. So in the pectoral girdle, you have the clavicles and the scapulae. And then in the pelvic girdle, you have the pelvic bones. No matter what bone we're talking about, it is approximately 35% organic matter. This organic matter consists of cells called osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts, and extracellular matrix. Now, the ECM of bone has a special name. It's called osteoid. Osteoid. An osteoid is composed of ground substance, including proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Remember, these are large molecules that help bring water and hold water in tissues. And you have collagen fibers. The collagen fibers provide resistance to stretching, and they also provide flexibility. The remaining 65% of bone is composed of hydroxyapatites. These are mineral salts. These are mainly tiny needle-like calcium phosphate crystals. Here's the chemical formula for them, but you're not required to remember that. What I hope you see is that there's calcium and phosphate. So that's why these are calcium phosphate crystals. Hydroxyapatites are responsible for the hardness of bones, and in part, its resistance to compression. So when you look at a documentary and you see an archaeologist or other scientist picking up a bone or a historian holding someone's bone, you're mostly looking at the hydroxyapatites that are remaining after the organic material has decayed away. So I really like this figure from one of the textbooks that we've used here at Bristol. It shows normal bone here, and then what happens to the bone if you remove the organic material. In this case, you can see the bone becomes very brittle and it shatters easily, it splinters. And then down here it shows you what happens if you remove the hydroxyapatites. You see the bone becomes very flexible and rubbery. You could almost tie a knot in it if you had to. So the structure of bone is really truly a contribution of the organic matter as well as the inorganic hydroxyapatites. So now let's wrap up this video with some functions. Your bone has probably more functions than you realize. The first function that I'm sure you're familiar with is protection. Certain bones like the skull, the sternum, the ribs, and the pelvis protect underlying essential soft organs. They form like a shell or a hard covering around them so that they are less affected by impacts to the body. For your second function, your bones are important storehouses for minerals and they help maintain your acid-base homeostasis. You see, your bones are a major storehouse for electrolytes in your body, things like calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium salts. These minerals, which are also present in your blood, by the way, act as electrolytes, acids, and bases. They have a variety of functions. They participate, for example, in signal transduction and communication between cells. They are parts of enzymes and contribute to their functions. In any case, by storing calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium, your bones help maintain your electrolyte and acid-base balance. Next is blood cell formation. Your third function for your bone is that they house red bone marrow, which is a specialized type of connective tissue that helps to form red blood cells, white blood cells, and cell fragments called platelets. The process of forming blood cells is called hematopoiesis. Hematopoiesis. You might want to try that. Try saying that a few times. It's one of the fun words in anatomy and physiology. Hematopoiesis. Fourth function is attachment. Your bones serve as attachment sites for most skeletal muscles. This means that when those muscles contract, they pull on your bones, and that generates movement at a joint. Number 5 is support. The bones of the skeleton support the weight of the body and provide its structural framework. Number 6, nutrient storage. Did you know that your bones store fat? They contain yellow bone marrow, which contains fat cells or adipocytes, and those adipocytes store triglycerides. Fatty acids from the breakdown of triglycerides can be used for energy by the cells in your body. Here's the last function, hormone production. Your bone produces osteocalin, which helps to regulate insulin secretion and glucose homeostasis. It's also involved in managing energy use inside of your body. So the functions of bone, as you probably can guess, is going to be on your exam. You need to know those functions. Now, in my previous videos, I've given you some sort of mnemonic to remember the functions for different tissues and body structures. Here's a mnemonic that I found online for the functions of bones. It says some men prefer miniskirts but can't find enough skin. So the S in some is for support, the M in men is for movement, the P in prefer is for protection, mini skirts is for mineral storage, then the B in but is blood cell formation, and the E in enough is for energy storage. I have to be honest, not my favorite mnemonic. So can you think of a better one? I'll give you 1 bonus point for turning in a mnemonic for the functions of bone and 3 bonus points for a really good submission. So let's turn this into a contest. You can turn in your submissions to me and we'll vote as a class to see who can come up with the best mnemonic. Now let's wrap up this video by talking about the bones of the skeleton by shape. It turns out that you can classify all the bones of the skeleton into one of 4 major groups. The first group is the long bones. These bones are longer than they are wide, and they'll include the bones of your limbs, except for your patella, the carpals, remember those are your wrist bones, and the tarsals, those are your ankle bones. So think about bones like the femur, the tibia, the radius, the ulna. All of those would be long bones. Next, you have short bones. These are cube-shaped. They're roughly as long as they are wide. And the bones of your wrist, that is the carpals, the bones of your ankles, that is the tarsals, and your patella, which is called a sesamoid bone, all of those are short bones. Then you have the bones of the skeleton that are kind of like the ones in your skull and the scapulae and the ribs. These are very thin, flat, and slightly curved bones. They are called flat bones. So again, that's your sternum, the scapulae, the ribs, and most of the bones of your skull. Then finally, you have the irregular bones. These are bones that don't really fit into the other categories. They have complicated shapes, and they would be exemplified by the vertebrae and your pelvic bones. That is the os coxae. So that brings us to the end of this video. During this video, I talked about the 3 types of skeletal cartilage. Remember, we talked about the hyaline cartilage, which connects bones together. It's the cartilage that you find in your joints that provides lubrication and a little bit of shock absorption. We talked a bit about the elastic cartilage, kind of like what you would find in the epiglottis and a few other structures. It has elastic fibers in it, which allows this type of cartilage to be more flexible than the hyaline. I also talked a bit about the fibrocartilages. Remember, they're found in the pubic symphysis and in the intervertebral discs. The main feature of this type of skeletal cartilage is that it has collagen bundles arranged in parallel fashion, which provides compressibility and also resistance to pulling in one plane. I talked about the two divisions of the skeleton. Remember, we mentioned that the skeleton is divided into the axial division, which makes up the major axis of the body, consists of the skull, the bones of the vertebral column, the sternum, and the ribs. And then we had the appendicular division of the skeleton, which consists of the bones of your limbs, that's your arms and your legs, as well as the shoulder girdle and the pelvic girdle that connect those to the axial skeleton. You'll want to be sure that you know the functions of those divisions when it comes to test time. We also classified bones into 4 categories according to the structure of the bones. We talked about long bones, which are longer than they are wide. We said that most bones in the skeleton fall into this category, and we talked about the humerus and the femur and the bones of the fingers as being examples of long bones. We talked about the short bones, which are about as long as they are wide. They're roughly cube-shaped, and you will find those types of bones in the wrists and in the ankles. Remember, those are the carpals and the tarsals. We also said that bones could be called flat bones when they're kind of flat or thin and curved, like the bones of the skull or like the sternum. Finally, we said that a bone might be classified as irregular because it doesn't fit into any of the other categories, and we said that the pelvic bones would be an example of that. The last thing that we talked about in this video were the 5 important functions of bone tissue. I just want to remind you that there is a bonus point out there for the best mnemonic for the 5 functions of bone tissue. What are those 5 functions? Do you remember? I hope you said protection. So remember, certain bones of the skeleton, like the skull and the ribs and the pelvic bones, they actually form a hard case or covering around the soft, fleshy, vital organs of the body, like the brain, the heart, and the lungs. We also said that the bones of the skeleton provide support. They transfer the weight of the upper body to the lower body. The bones also are mineral storage spots. Remember that calcium, phosphate, and magnesium are stored in the bones, and that when the body is low on any of these electrolytes, then it can actually recover them from the bones. We said that the bones also provide nutrient storage. So remember that there are 2 types of bone marrow. You have the red marrow, and then you have the yellow. The yellow marrow is composed of adipose tissue, and it provides nutrient storage. 5th function, hematopoiesis, blood cell formation. This happens in the red marrow that we find in certain bones. And then there was one 6th function that I somewhat mentioned, and that was hormone production. So remember that your bones produce a hormone called osteocalin, and that it's involved in glucose regulation. So we talked about a lot of things in this video. I hope that it was very helpful to you. In my next video, we'll talk a little bit about the microscopic anatomy of the bone, and we'll look at some bone structures in greater detail. I'll see you then.